She came home early with champagne, a promotion, and 38 years of love she never once questioned. What she found instead would destroy every version of herself she had ever believed in. They were laughing. Her mother, her father, her brother, her sister, laughing at her. Not the warm, familiar laughter she grew up longing for. Cold, calculated, cruel. The wallet's getting promoted again. Time to upgrade our vacation plans. If you have ever loved someone with everything you had and discovered it meant absolutely nothing to them, stay with me until the very end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The drive home should have taken 45 minutes. Amara Ellison made it in 32. She wasn't speeding because she was reckless. She was speeding because she was happy. Genuinely, almost painfully happy. In a way she hadn't felt since she was a little girl sitting on the front steps of her grandmother's house in Baltimore, eating peach cobbler out of a cracked ceramic bowl and believing, the way children believe things before the world corrects them, that life was mostly good and people were mostly kind. That was a long time ago. But tonight felt close to that. Close enough that she kept checking the back seat just to make sure the bags were real. The Tiffany box for her mother, the cognac for her father, the limited edition Air Jordans for Jerome, the cashmere wrap for Desiree. 4 bags, 4 people. One piece of news that had been burning a hole in her chest since 11:47 that morning, when CFO Richard Hargrove had closed his office door, looked her dead in the eye and said, "Amara, the board voted unanimously. Executive Vice President, effective the 1st of next month. You've earned it." She had not cried in that office. She had sat across from him with her hands folded in her lap, nodded once, said, "Thank you, Richard. I won't let the company down," and waited until she reached the women's restroom on the 14th floor before she pressed both palms flat against the cold tile wall and let herself shake. 38 years old. The first black woman EVP in the company's 112-year history, a salary that would make her father's eyes water. A title that her mother could finally brag about at church without having to stretch the truth. She had called home 4 times during the drive. No one picked up. She told herself they were at dinner. She told herself the signal was bad. She told herself a lot of things during the 45-minute drive from downtown to the quiet, leafy suburb of Brookhaven, where her family gathered every other Sunday in the house she secretly helped pay for, the 6-bedroom colonial with the double garage and the stone fountain out front that her mother had fallen in love with 6 years ago when Amara's career was starting to really climb. She pulled into the driveway at 7:14 on a Friday evening, 2 days before anyone expected her. The lights inside were on, every window blazing warm and gold against the October dark. She could hear them through the door before she even reached the porch steps. Laughter. The sound of silverware against good dishes. Her mother's high, bright cackle that always cut through every other sound in a room. Her brother Jerome's big baritone rolling underneath it. Her sister Desiree's quick, sharp laugh that she used when she was saying something she thought was clever. Amara stood on the porch with 4 shopping bags hanging from her arms and a smile already forming on her face and her finger poised to ring the doorbell. And then she heard her own name. Not said with love, said like a punchline. "Amara's getting promoted again," her mother Margaret was saying, and the table erupted before she even finished the sentence. "Executive Vice President, Lord have mercy, that child is going to be richer than cents." "Good," said Jerome, and his voice had a quality to it that Amara had never quite been able to name, but had always somewhere low in her stomach felt. "Because I need another 200 to finish the Series B round. The investors are stalling, and I cannot show up to that meeting looking like I'm struggling." 200,000? Desiree said. "Obviously 1,000. Who asks their sister for $200? More laughter. Amara did not move. Her mother spoke again. "She'll say yes. She always says yes. You know how Amara is. You make her feel needed, and she opens that purse so fast her arm gets tired." "She needs to feel needed," Jerome said, with something that was almost tenderness except for the contempt underneath it. "That's her whole thing. Nobody wants her, so she makes herself indispensable. Classic." "Stop," said Desiree, but she was still laughing when she said it. "Stop. That's mean." "Mean is calling your sister fat behind her back," Jerome said. "I'm just being accurate." She is not going to be happy when she finds out about the Maldives trip, her mother said. She's not going to find out, said her father, Victor, and his voice was the one that cut deepest because Victor Ellison was a man of few words, and the words he chose were always precise. And if she does, you tell her it was a medical trip. Tell her my heart was acting up. She'll believe it. She always believes it. We should probably coordinate before she comes Sunday, Desiree said. Jerome, you're doing the tech thing. Mama, you've got the property taxes on the Savannah house. And don't forget the lease on my Range Rover, their mother added. And I need her to co-sign on the new condo, Desiree said. The one in Midtown. I already picked it out, $4,200 a month, but she makes enough. The woman is a walking ATM, Jerome said, and there was real warmth in his voice now, the kind of warmth he saved for things he loved. God bless her. A wallet with legs, their mother said. The table erupted. A wallet with legs, 4 people, laughing at her. At the dark skin she'd inherited from her grandmother and spent 38 years learning not to apologize for. At the body she'd carried through boardrooms and conference calls and red-eye flights and 18-hour workdays. At the empty apartment she went home to every night because she had spent so much of herself funding other people's lives that she had never quite gotten around to building her own. Amara stood on that porch for what felt like a very long time. She did not ring the doorbell. She set the shopping bags down very carefully on the porch railing. The Tiffany box, the cognac, the Jordans, the cashmere. And she turned around and walked back to her car. She did not run. She did not slam the car door. She sat behind the wheel and stared at the stone fountain in the center of the driveway, the one her mother had fallen in love with, the one Amara had never been directly asked to help pay for but somehow had anyway. And she breathed, short, shallow, useless breaths, while something inside her chest came apart very quietly, the way old stitching gives way, not all at once, but seam by seam until the whole thing just opens. She did not cry immediately. For a long moment she simply sat there with her hands in her lap and her chest caving in, and the shopping bag still visible through the windshield, sitting on the porch railing in the October dark, waiting for people who had never actually been waiting for her. Then she cried. Not the polished cinematic kind of crying, the ugly kind, the kind that bends you forward and makes sounds you don't recognize and leaves your whole face swollen and wrong, the kind that 38 years of held-back grief produces when it finally finds the exit. She cried for 20 minutes in that driveway. She cried for the hospital bills she'd paid without being asked, for the down payment on her parents' house that she'd handed over at 26 years old, fresh off her first real bonus, because her mother had said, "We're family, Amara. Family takes care of family." And she had believed that with everything she had. She cried for the vacation she hadn't taken because the money was already gone, for the therapy she kept postponing, for the relationships that had fizzled because she was always tired, always sending money, always on the phone with someone else's emergency that turned out to be, what? A lie. A calculation. A line item in a budget she didn't know she was funding. A wallet with legs. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Checked the rearview mirror. Her eyes were devastated. Her mascara had gone everywhere. She looked exactly like a woman who had just had the foundation pulled out from under her life. She started the car. She did not notice the black Rolls-Royce Phantom parked across the street. It had been there since before she arrived. No plates visible from this angle. The windows blacked out to a degree that was not entirely legal. If you walked past it on a normal day, you would notice it and immediately decide not to look twice. The kind of car that communicated, with absolute clarity, that its owner did not require your attention and would prefer you did not offer it. Inside the car, in the rear seat, a man watched her. Lucien Devereaux was not a man who watched people often. He moved through the world at a remove, by choice and by necessity, with security personnel between himself and everything that breathed, because in his line of work, closeness was a liability and observation was survival. He had been in this particular neighborhood for an entirely unrelated reason, a property acquisition that his lawyers were handling 3 blocks east. And he had been sitting in this car, reading a document, when the woman in the dark green BMW had pulled into that driveway with the kind of urgency that suggested she was carrying good news. He had watched her get out of the car. He had watched her walk up to the door and stop. He had watched the whole thing happen on her face from 40 feet away. The moment the laughter reached her, the moment the words reached her, The moment whatever she was carrying inside herself cracked open. He couldn't hear what was being said. He didn't need to. He'd spent 30 years reading rooms and reading people and reading the space between what was happening and what people were willing to admit was happening. He watched her put the bags down. He watched her walk back to her car. He watched her sit behind that wheel for 22 minutes, and then he watched her collect herself. Not all the way, not close to all the way, but enough. Enough to start the engine, enough to check the mirror, enough to put the car in reverse. She pulled out of the driveway. She drove past the Rolls-Royce without seeing it. Lucien Devereaux watched her taillights disappear around the corner, and then he sat very still for a moment, and then he said one word to the man in the driver's seat. Find out who she is. His head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Callum, who'd been with him for 11 years and had learned never to ask why, simply said, "Yes, sir," and reached for his phone. The property acquisition could wait. Amara drove for an hour without knowing where she was going. She ended up at a diner on the edge of the highway, the kind of place with vinyl booths and laminated menus and a pie case by the register. And she sat in the farthest corner booth and ordered coffee she didn't drink and stared at the table. Her phone had 11 notifications, 3 from work, 8 from numbers she'd been meaning to delete for months. Nothing from her family, nothing from her family. She turned the phone face down. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with the look of someone who had seen every kind of heartbreak walk through a diner at 10 o'clock at night, refilled her coffee without being asked and didn't say a word. And Amara was so grateful for that small kindness that her throat tightened all over again. She sat there until midnight. She thought about 38 years, about the version of herself that had believed the story she'd been told, that she was loved, that the family was close, that what they had was real and just expressed differently, the way some families are not warm but are still there in the ways that count. She had built her entire emotional architecture around that story. She had made every financial decision, every career choice, every sacrifice in service of that story. She had stayed in a city she sometimes hated because her family was here. She had said no to a posting in London. She had said no to a relationship with a man who had asked her to come to Seattle with him. For them. For people who called her a wallet with legs when she wasn't in the room. She paid for her untouched coffee and left a $40 tip because the waitress had refilled it 3 times without asking, and because it was the only place Amara could think to put the kindness she suddenly had no one to give it to. She drove home to her apartment. It was a good apartment. Not lavish, but good. She made enough money to live significantly better, but had never quite let herself. There was always something, always a reason the money needed to go somewhere else first. The apartment had white walls she'd never gotten around to painting, furniture she'd had since her late 20s, a kitchen she barely used. A life that looked, she realized now, like a waiting room, like she was always getting ready to live rather than living. She stood in the middle of her living room in her work clothes at 12:45 in the morning and looked around at all of it. The promotion letter was still in her bag. Executive Vice President. She had earned that title by outworking every person in every room she had ever entered. She had earned it by being right more often than her competitors, by seeing financial patterns that other analysts missed, by building a reputation for integrity so solid that clients called her personally rather than going through the company. She had done all of that while simultaneously functioning as the financial backbone of a family that laughed at her behind her back. The thought arrived quietly and then became something she couldn't contain. What would she be if she had done all of that for herself? She didn't have an answer. It was a question she had never once been allowed to ask. She went to her bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall. Her phone buzzed. It was Jerome. She stared at his name on the screen for a long time. She didn't pick up. It buzzed again. Then again. Then a text. "Sis, you coming Sunday? Mom made a list of some stuff she needs to talk to you about. Also, can you call me back? It's kind of urgent." A list? Of course there was a list. She turned the phone off and lay down on top of the covers without taking her shoes off, and closed her eyes and breathed through the pain the way you breathe through something physical. Deliberately, deliberately, deliberately. And waited for morning. Monday arrived gray and cold. Amara was at her desk by 7. By 9, she had closed 3 deals, restructured a portfolio analysis, and sent a memo to the board outlining her first priorities as EVP. She did it with the precision and focus that had gotten her here. The same focus she used to use to not think about things she didn't want to think about. But something had shifted. She couldn't feel the old familiar current of purpose that usually ran underneath her work, the sense that what she was building toward something, the feeling that the sacrifice meant something because it was feeding something that mattered. That current was gone. What replaced it was something colder and harder and more honest. By 10:30, she had not returned Jerome's call. By noon, she had not responded to her mother's text asking if she was still coming Sunday. By 3 o'clock, Desiree had sent a series of messages that started friendly and became increasingly pointed. Amara read them all, responded to none of them. By Thursday, her family had gone quiet in a way that was itself a message. The sudden silence of people who realized the machine had stopped and didn't know how to restart it. On Friday afternoon, she was standing at the window in her office on the 14th floor, watching the city move below her when her assistant knocked and said, "Ms. Ellison, there's a man here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. He says his name is Devereaux." She turned. "Does he have a last name?" "He says you'll understand when you see him." Her assistant paused. I think you should come out. The whole lobby is acting strange." Amara frowned. "What do you mean, acting strange?" "I mean the security guards are standing up straight, both of them, at the same time." Her assistant lowered her voice. "That's never happened." Amara followed her out. He was standing in the center of the lobby with his hands in his pockets and the particular stillness of a man who had never once in his life needed to fill a room with noise to dominate it. He was tall, several inches over 6 feet, with the kind of face that had been built by a combination of genetics and difficult living into something that you could not look away from. Dark suit, no tie, a watch that did not announce itself. He was looking at the abstract painting on the far wall of the lobby with the focused, slightly skeptical expression of a man who knew exactly what things were worth. He turned when she came in. Their eyes met, and he said simply, "Ms. Ellison, I've been wanting to speak with you. I won't take much of your time." She said, "I don't know who you are." "I know," he said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a plain white card with only a name and a phone number. "But I know who you are. I know what you've built. And I know what was taken from you." He paused. "I have a proposal. It won't make sense yet, but I'm asking you to hear it." She looked at the card, then at him. Something in his eyes was not a threat. She had been in enough rooms with enough dangerous people, so the financial world had plenty, to know the difference between a man who wanted to frighten you and a man who simply was not frightened of anything. These were different things. "What kind of proposal?" she said. "Come work for me," he said. "I'll make sure no one ever treats you like property again." The lobby was very quiet. Amara Ellison stood very still with the card in her hand and looked at this man she had never met who somehow knew the thing that had been done to her. The thing she had not told a single person. And she thought about her family's silence and her white apartment walls and the waiting room her life had become. She thought about the word proposal and what it meant and who was saying it and why. She should have said no. Every reasonable instinct she had, and she had good instincts, they were the reason she was still standing, said, "Say no. Ask questions. Walk away." Instead, she heard herself say, "Give me until Monday." He nodded once, turned back toward the door. "Mr. Devereaux," she said. He stopped, did not turn. "How do you know what was done to me?" A pause, just long enough to be a real answer. "Because I was there," he said, and he walked out. Amara stood in the lobby of her own office building with a white card in her hand and a cold certainty settling over her that she had just had a conversation that was going to change every single thing that came next. And she did not yet know whether that terrified her, or whether, for the first time in a very long time, it felt like something that might, against all odds, be worth walking toward. She looked down at the card. One name, one number, nothing else. She closed her fingers around it. She didn't sleep that weekend. Not really. She dozed in the chair by the window with the white card sitting on the coffee table in front of her, and her mind running the same circuit over and over, The lobby, his voice, the stillness of him, the way the security guards had straightened up like something involuntary had fired through their nervous systems the moment he walked in. She kept coming back to one sentence. Not the proposal, not even the part about property. Because I was there, on that street, on that night, which meant he had seen her fall apart in a driveway over shopping bags she'd bought for people who were laughing at her from inside a house she'd helped pay for, which meant some stranger, some unknown man in a car she hadn't noticed, had witnessed the worst 15 minutes of her adult life and then, a week later, walked into her office building like it was the most natural thing in the world. That should have frightened her more than it did. She turned the card over for the 100th time. Plain white stock. Heavy. The kind of card that costs money to produce. His name in simple black type. L. Devereaux. Below it, a number with a 202 area code. No title, no company, no website. Just a name and a number and the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to explain himself on a business card because the people who mattered already knew. She should have called her attorney. She should have called her company's security liaison. She should have done a dozen sensible things. Instead, on Sunday morning, she opened her laptop and typed the name into a search engine. What came back was almost nothing. That was its own kind of answer. There were financial executives with less money whose names were plastered across Forbes profiles and LinkedIn endorsements and charity gala photographs. Lucien Devereaux appeared in exactly 3 places. A brief mention in a 2019 Wall Street Journal piece about East Coast commercial real estate consolidation. His name listed as a silent partner in a development group, nothing more. A single photograph from a city council reception in D.C. that she almost missed because he was standing at the far edge of the frame with his back partly turned, as if he'd become aware of the camera and adjusted accordingly, and a 2-line entry in a business registry listing a holding company called Meridian Capital Group, incorporated in Delaware, assets undisclosed. That was it. A man who moved that kind of money through that many channels and left a digital footprint the size of a thumbprint was not an accident. That was architecture. Deliberate, meticulous, expensive architecture. She closed the laptop. She picked up the card. She called the number. It rang once. "Ms. Ellison," he said. Not a question. "Monday," she said. "You said come Monday." "I did." "I'll come." A pause. She needed him to understand something. "I'm not agreeing to anything. I'm listening. There's a difference." "I know the difference," he said. "I'll send a car. I'll drive myself." Another pause, shorter. "Of course." He gave her an address in Georgetown and hung up. She sat with the dead phone in her hand and thought about the version of herself who had driven to her family's house 2 weeks ago with shopping bags and champagne wishes and believed she was going home. That version felt very far away. Not gone. Just reconfigured, like something that had been set at the wrong angle her entire life and had finally, painfully, been corrected. She was not prepared for Monday morning. Not the address. A 4-story limestone building 2 blocks from the waterfront, no signage. A discreet brass plate by the door that said only Meridian, and not the interior, which was the kind of deliberately understated that only money with nothing left to prove could produce. Dark wood, clean lines, art on the walls that was genuinely good rather than expensively generic. A receptionist who did not smile the automatic smile of someone performing hospitality, but instead looked at Amara with frank, assessing eyes and said, "He's expecting you, 3rd floor," and went back to her work. Lucien was standing at the window when she came in. The office was large but not ostentatious. A long conference table, bookshelves that had actual books on them, not decorative red, the spines creased and tagged, a desk that looked like it was used rather than displayed. He turned when she entered, and in the daylight, in a room where she could look at him without the shock of an unexpected lobby encounter, she saw him more clearly, somewhere in his mid-40s, a face that had done a lot of living, not carelessly, but intensely, the way certain kinds of work marks you. His eyes were the kind of dark that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. "Ms. Ellison," he said, "sit anywhere." She chose a chair at the conference table rather than the sitting area by the window. A small choice. He noticed it. She noticed him noticing it. He sat across from her and did not open with small talk. I want you to run the financial architecture for my legitimate holdings, he said. Global, primarily real estate, infrastructure, and private equity. Approximately $4 billion in active assets, another 2 in development pipeline. The work is complicated, the discretion required is absolute, and the compensation will be the best offer you have ever received. Amara looked at him steadily. You said legitimate holdings. I did. Which implies the existence of other holdings. It does. And you want me to stay out of those. I want you to have no part of those, he said, and his voice was very clear. Not because I need you protected from legal exposure, though you would be, but because I don't mix people. The people who work in one part of my organization are not the same people who work in another part. That's not negotiation. That's structure. She let that sit for a moment. Why me? Because I've seen your work, he said. Your public record is extensive enough. The Callaway restructuring, the merger analysis you did for Whitmore Capital that everyone in the industry knows you wrote, even though your name isn't on it. The Bellhaven infrastructure deal. He paused. You are, by any objective measure, one of the 3 best financial minds currently operating in this city. The other 2 work for banks that would never let them do what needs to be done. What needs to be done? She repeated. Organize chaos into value, he said simply. I have assets that have been managed well enough, but not brilliantly. I need brilliance. I need someone who can see the whole board and 4 moves ahead simultaneously, who has no political debt inside the organization, and who is not trying to impress anyone. He looked at her directly. You have spent your entire career being brilliant for other people. I'm asking you to be brilliant for yourself. I'll make sure what you build has your name on it. It was exactly the right thing to say, and she was experienced enough to recognize when something was exactly the right thing to say and wonder whether that was craftsmanship or truth. You still haven't told me how you knew what happened to me, she said. No, he said. I haven't. That's a problem. I was parked across the street from your family's house on the night you arrived, he said. I was there for unrelated reasons. I saw what happened. I had you investigated afterward, your professional background, your financial history, your family relationships as they could be documented. He did not soften this or apologize for it. He said it the way you state a fact. I know what your family has taken from you over the past 9 years. The amounts, the patterns, the methods. I know about the loan your brother never repaid. I know about the mortgage assistance that was presented as temporary. I know about your parents' real estate portfolio in Savannah. The air in the room changed. My parents don't have a real estate portfolio in Savannah, she said. A pause. Just long enough. Ms. Ellison, he said quietly, yes, they do. She heard the words, she processed them. She sat with them. And something she had been holding together since that Friday night on the porch, some last insisting corner of her that still wanted to believe the explanation was complicated, that the conversation she'd heard was a bad night, an aberration, that people were messy and families were complicated, and it didn't necessarily mean that corner gave out, not dramatically, quietly, like a light going off in a room you hadn't realized you still needed. How much? She said. He told her. She looked at the table. He waited. I need to think, she said. Take whatever time you need. She stood up. He stood up. Neither of them moved toward the door. If I take this, Gitol, she said. If. There are things I won't do and things I need in writing and conversations we haven't had yet about structure and separation and my own legal exposure. All of that is available, he said. And I won't be managed, she said. I don't take direction on financial decisions from people who don't understand financial decisions. Not from you, not from anyone in your organization. If I'm running this, I'm running it. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent. I wouldn't have it any other way, he said. She walked out. She got to her car and sat in it in the parking garage for 6 minutes before she could make her hands work properly. $4 billion. Her family's secret real estate portfolio. The woman is a walking ATM. She started the car. She called Jerome that afternoon. Not because she had decided anything, because she needed to hear his voice and calibrate it against what she now knew. That was a thing she'd always been able to do, hold a conversation on the surface while her mind worked underneath it, reading patterns and variances, the financial analyst's habit applied to human beings. He picked up on the first ring, which was itself information because Jerome never picked up on the first ring unless he wanted something urgently. "Sis! Hey, I've been trying to reach you." "I know," she said. "I had a busy week." Yeah, I heard about the promotion. EVP, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you." The warmth in his voice was so practiced that if she hadn't been listening for it, she would have felt it. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something. You have a minute?" "I have a few minutes." "So the Series B is actually coming together really well, but there's a timing issue. The lead investor wants to close before the end of the quarter, which is great. But my co-founder Marcus needs his legal fees covered before then, or he's going to... It's complicated, but basically the deal falls apart if I can't show clean cap table documentation by the 30th. And the attorney is being difficult about working without his retainer covered, so I need..." "How much?" she said. A beat. The briefest recalibration. 80,000, he said, "just as a bridge. I'll have it back to you within 60 days of close, I promise." She said nothing for a moment. "Amara? You still there?" "I'm here," she said. "Jerome, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight." "Of course, what? How's the Savannah property doing?" Silence. Not a long silence. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But 2 seconds of silence from a man who talked for a living was a paragraph. "What Savannah property?" he said. His voice was good, neutral, slightly confused, just the right amount of it. If she hadn't already known, she might have believed it. "Never mind," she said. "I'll call you back about the 80,000. "You're the best," he said, and the relief in his voice was so fast, so unguarded, that it told her everything she had already known and confirmed everything she was beginning to understand. She hung up. She sat in her car in the parking garage of her office building and pressed the back of her head against the headrest and breathed through the understanding that her brother had lied to her face, smoothly, immediately, reflexively, and felt absolutely nothing about it except a cold, diagnostic clarity. She called Lucien Devereaux. He picked up. "I have questions," she said. "I'll answer what I can." "How many properties are in Savannah?" 3 residential, 1 commercial." "Whose names are on the deeds?" "A holding company, incorporated 2 years before your father officially retired on medical grounds." A pause. "The medical retirement you funded with the insurance gap payments." She closed her eyes. "What else?" she said. "Your sister purchased a condo in Midtown Atlanta 14 months ago. Cash. The cash was sourced from a joint account she holds with your mother that was opened the same month you transferred $230,000 to your parents for what they described to you as renovations. The renovation that her mother had sent her photographs of. The new kitchen. The new floors. Doesn't it look beautiful, baby? You have such a good heart." "Okay," Amara said. "Are you all right?" he said. It was the first time he had asked anything close to a personal question. "No," she said, "but I will be." A pause. "Monday's meeting. I want to come back and finish the conversation." "I'll have the documentation ready," he said. "Not the documentation," she said. "Not yet. I want to finish the conversation." Another pause. Different in quality from his previous pauses, less calculated. "Wednesday," he said. 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock, she said, and hung up. Her family found her on Tuesday. Not individually. All at once, which told her Jerome had made calls after their conversation, had said something that activated the machinery, had set them in motion. At 9 in the morning, her mother called. At 9:15, her father called. At 9:45, Desiree sent a text that said, "We need to talk. Something is wrong with you lately, and we're worried." By noon, Jerome had sent 3 texts and 2 emails and left a voicemail that opened with, "Amara, look, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like there's something you're not telling me." There's something you're not telling me. From the man who had lied to her face about Savannah without blinking. She let all of it go to voicemail and kept working. At 2:30, her mother called again. This time, Amara picked up. "Amara Ellison," her mother said, and her voice had that particular compressed energy of a woman who had been waiting all day to say something and had made herself wait just long enough to feel righteous about it. "Why are you ignoring this family?" "I'm not ignoring you, Mama. I've been working." "You're always working. You've been working since you were 22 years old and you still can't find 5 minutes to call your mother back?" "I called you back right now. Don't get smart." A breath, a shift in tactic. Amara could hear it, the way you hear a gear change. "Baby, we're worried about you. Jerome says you were asking strange questions about Savannah. What is going on with you? Are you sick? Is it stress?" "I'm fine, Mama." "Because when you get like this, when you get quiet like this, last time you got quiet like this, you had that episode at work, remember? And you didn't tell anyone for months." That episode had been a panic attack. Once. 7 years ago. Her mother had filed it and kept it and pulled it out whenever she needed Amara to feel fragile. "I remember," Amara said. Her voice was very even. "I just worry about my baby. You know how I am." "I know. So why don't you come Sunday? Come home. We'll have dinner, all of us, like normal. I'll make your favorite Mama?" Amara said. "Do you have property in Savannah?" The silence this time was different from Jerome's. Longer. More complex. In Jerome's silence there had been calculation. In her mother's silence there was something raw. The silence of someone who had been caught and was deciding right now in real time whether to keep lying or make a controlled admission and reframe it. Her mother chose to keep lying. "What on earth are you talking about?" she said. "Your father and I don't have anything in Savannah. Where did you hear that?" "Someone told me." "Someone told you?" Her mother's voice shifted into a register Amara knew, the warm, slightly wounded register of a woman who considered herself deeply misunderstood by the people who loved her most. "Baby, I don't know who is putting things in your head, but you need to be careful. You are a successful woman, and people want to destabilize you. They see what you have, and they want to take it. That's how the world works." Amara said nothing. "You hear me?" her mother said. "Don't let these people mess with your family relationships. We are blood. Nobody is ever going to love you the way your family loves you." "I know," Amara said. "Come Sunday." "I'll think about it." She hung up. She sat very still for a long moment, her hand flat on her desk, feeling her own pulse in her fingertips. And she thought about the word love, and how many different shapes it could be made to take if you were skilled enough and the other person needed it badly enough. Wednesday came. She arrived at Meridian at 2 o'clock exactly and was shown to the 3rd floor without ceremony. Lucien was already there, not at the conference table this time. He was at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, reading something. He looked up when she came in, gestured to the chair across from him. Different from Monday. Less formal. She wasn't sure whether that was intentional or whether things had simply progressed past the point where formality served any purpose. "Tell me about your family," she said, before he could open with anything. He looked at her. "Why?" "Because you know everything about mine and I know nothing about yours, and I'm about to make a significant professional decision that involves trusting you with my reputation and my future." A long pause. He set down the paper he was reading. "My mother died when I was 11, he said. "My father was absent in the relevant sense. I was raised in New Orleans by my uncle, who was in a business that you can probably guess. I watched what happened to people who were loyal without being smart about who they were loyal to. I decided at a young age that I would be both." He paused. "I have no siblings, no children, no wife, and I have never, in the course of my professional life, taken anything from anyone who didn't have it coming." She studied him. "That's not a complete answer." "No," he said, "it's not. But it's a true one." She looked at the desk between them. "If I come work for you, if I restructure your portfolio and build out the legitimate side the way I know it can be built, what happens to my family?" He was quiet for a moment. "Nothing," he said, "unless they do it to themselves." "And if they do it to themselves?" Another pause. The kind that meant the next thing he said was going to be precise. "Then I will make sure," he said, "that the consequences land on the people who earned them, not on you." She looked at him for a long time. I'll need full documentation of their Savannah holdings, she said, and the Midtown condo, and anything else your people have found. I'm not using it yet. I just need to know the shape of the thing I've been living inside. He opened the desk drawer and produced a folder she realized he'd had ready before she walked in. He slid it across the desk. She did not open it. She picked it up and held it in her lap and looked at him. I'll take the position, she said. He nodded. No triumph in it. No warmth either, not exactly. Something else. The look of a man who had expected this outcome and was nonetheless somehow relieved. There's one more thing, she said. Before I sign anything, before any of this becomes real, I need to know why. Not why you want me for the work. Why you came into my lobby. Why you didn't just hire someone else and leave what you saw on that street as something you saw on a street. The question hung in the room. He was quiet for longer than he'd been quiet before. I've built a significant portion of my life on understanding what people will do when they think no one's watching, he said finally. What you did. Walking away, putting those bags down, not going back in to confront them, not calling anyone, just walking. He paused. I've never seen anyone absorb that kind of damage and keep their dignity intact in the same motion. I didn't know that was possible. She held very still. That's not a business reason, she said. No, he said. It isn't. She opened the folder. The first page was a property deed. Savannah, Georgia. Her parents' names embedded inside a holding company structure that was just transparent enough that anyone who knew what they were looking at could see through it. 3 residential properties, 1 commercial lease. The aggregate value was significant enough that she had to read the number twice. The second page was a bank statement, a joint account in her mother and sister's names. The deposit line, 1 entry, 14 months ago, $230,000, matched exactly the amount she had wired to her parents for the renovation. The third page was an email chain, her family's email chain. She recognized Jerome's address, her mother's, Desiree's, her father's. She recognized the subject line, too, because she'd received a version of it herself. Sunday plans. Amara coming. But this was the thread she had not been on. She read 2 lines, then she closed the folder. Not because she couldn't handle the rest, because she needed to get out of this building, get into her car, and process what she now understood with absolute certainty. That the family she had funded and protected and restructured her life around had been, for a very long time, running a coordinated financial operation against her, and they had done it with the kind of careful, methodical consistency that you only bring to something you intend to continue indefinitely. She stood up. I'll have my attorney reach out to yours tomorrow, she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. Of course, he said. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame, because it had just occurred to her, fully, irreversibly, with the weight of everything in that folder pressing down on her at once, that the moment she walked out of this building and called her attorney and started the process of signing on with Lucien Devereaux, there was no version of the future in which her family didn't eventually find out. No version in which this stayed quiet. No version in which she could protect them from the consequences of what they had built. And for the first time, standing in a doorway in a building she hadn't known existed 2 weeks ago, she was not sure she wanted to. Mr. Devereaux, she said. Yes. When this unravels, she stopped, restarted. When they find out what I know, when the accounts freeze and the properties get complicated and the investors start asking questions. She paused. How bad does it get? He looked at her from across the room. His voice was quiet and completely without malice when he answered. As bad, he said, as what they did to you. She stood in the doorway for 1 more second, then she walked out. And behind her, in the office she had just left, Lucien Devereaux sat back in his chair and looked at the door she'd closed and understood. With the instinct of a man who had spent his life reading rooms and reading people, that the woman who had just walked out of his office was no longer the same woman who had pulled into that driveway 2 weeks ago with shopping bags, and she called her attorney from the parking garage. Not because she had decided everything, because she had decided enough. And in her experience, enough was the only threshold that mattered. You never had all the information. You never had perfect clarity. You had enough, and then you moved, and then you found out the rest while you were already in motion. Marcus Webb had been her personal attorney for 6 years, a trim, precise man from Richmond who wore the same 3 suits in rotation and had the particular quality of someone who was never surprised by what human beings did to each other, only occasionally disappointed. He picked up on the second ring. "I need to set up a meeting," she said. "Not about work. Personal. I need to bring you something, and I need you to tell me what I'm looking at." A pause. Not the calculating kind. The careful kind. "How soon?" "Tomorrow morning, if you can." 8 o'clock, he said. "Bring whatever you have." She drove home with the folder on the passenger seat. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to look at it. The 2 lines she'd read from that email chain were still sitting in the front of her mind, very clear and very still, the way dangerous things go still when your brain understands that moving them will cause damage. She had recognized the subject line. Sunday plans, Amara coming, and then, in Jerome's handwriting, his clipped, no-punctuation typing style she'd read 10,000 times in text messages and emails about emergencies and opportunities and urgent requests. 2 lines that she had stopped reading because her body had told her to stop before her mind caught up. "She's been weird this week. Think she might be onto something. We need to move the Savannah account before Sunday or this whole thing gets complicated. Move the Savannah account. Not explain it, not come clean about it. Move it." She parked in her building's garage and sat in the car and understood, with a completeness that was almost peaceful in its clarity, that her family had not made a series of unfortunate financial decisions that she'd been unwittingly subsidizing. They had been running a strategy, a patient, coordinated, multi-year financial strategy, with her as the primary revenue source and concealment of assets as the operational objective. Jerome with his rotating tech ventures that always needed one more bridge round. Her mother with her medical emergencies and renovation projects. Desiree with her quiet cosign requests and casual mentions of cash shortfalls. Her father, silent, strategic Victor, whose name appeared on every entity, every deed, every account. The architect behind the performers. They had divided the labor. The thought arrived fully formed and sat in her chest like a stone. She went upstairs. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat at her kitchen table and opened the folder to the email chain and read all of it this time, from the first page to the last, every message, every thread, every forwarded attachment. It took 45 minutes. When she finished, she closed the folder and laid both hands flat on the table and breathed. 43 months of documented correspondence, 43 months of her family coordinating requests, timing their asks to coincide with Amara's bonus cycles, which they apparently tracked, and congratulating each other when they succeeded. There were messages celebrating the London posting she'd turned down because her mother had called crying about her father's heart. "She's staying," Jerome had written. "I told you the heart thing would work." There were spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets, embedded in email attachments with columns labeled ask amount, expected response time, success rate, notes. Her own name appeared in those spreadsheets approximately 200 times over 43 months, annotated with observations like, responds faster when framed as emergency and always transfers within 48 hours if you mention Victor's health, and once, in Desiree's handwriting on a printed page that someone had photographed and sent to the chain. Don't push her too hard in Q1, she gets suspicious when the requests cluster. Don't push her too hard. They had managed her, with the same skill and deliberateness that she applied to financial portfolios. Her family had managed her. Her psychology, her response patterns, her guilt thresholds, her loyalty. They had studied her, they had optimized for her, and she had never once seen it. That was the part that sat heaviest. Not the money. The money was recoverable. She had always known how to make money. It was the 9 years of believing something that had been engineered specifically for her to believe. 9 years of decisions made on false premises. 9 years of a self-narrative. I am someone who takes care of the people I love, that had been weaponized against her by the people who were supposed to be those people. She went to bed at midnight. She did not sleep. Marcus Webb read the folder in 40 minutes. He was a man who read things quickly and retained everything, and she had always appreciated that about him. But watching him work through the email chains, the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes, The single moment where he set the page down and looked at the wall before picking it back up. Told her everything she needed to know about what she was looking at from a legal standpoint. When he finished, he took off his glasses, placed them on the desk, and looked at her. "How did you get this?" he said. "Someone gave it to me." "Someone?" "Yes." "Does this someone have a name?" "Lucien Devereaux." The quality of Marcus's silence changed. It became the silence of a man exercising significant professional discipline. "Amara," he said, "I know what you're going to say." "I don't think you do." He laced his fingers together on the desk. "Lucien Devereaux is not a name that appears in polite legal conversation. The people I know who know that name know it the way you know the name of a weather system. From a distance, with respect." "He wants to hire me," she said, "to run his legitimate holdings, $4 billion in assets, private equity, real estate, infrastructure." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "And you're considering it?" "I've agreed to it." He stood up and walked to the window. He stood there for a while. Outside, the morning traffic was building on the street below, the ordinary machinery of an ordinary Wednesday, and Amara watched the back of her attorney's head and waited. "The documentation in this folder," he said finally, without turning around, "is enough to support a civil fraud claim, potentially criminal depending on how aggressively a DA wanted to pursue the wire transfer patterns." He paused. "But a significant portion of this material, the email chains in particular, would face chain of custody challenges in court. The question a judge would ask is how it was obtained, and the answer to that question is going to involve a man whose business activities are not entirely transparent." "I'm not planning to take them to court," she said. He turned around. "Then what are you planning?" "I'm planning to know the truth," she said. "I'm planning to make different decisions than I've been making. And I'm planning to take a position with an organization that will let me do work that reflects what I'm actually capable of." Marcus looked at her with the expression of a man who had advised enough clients through enough crises to recognize when someone had already decided and was performing the consultation as a courtesy. "If you go to work for Devereaux," he said, "your life changes in ways that are not entirely reversible. The legitimate operations are legitimate. I'm not disputing that. But proximity is its own kind of association, and association has consequences for your professional reputation, your relationships with existing clients." "Marcus," she said, "my family has been running a documented fraud operation against me for 43 months, and I funded 3 of their real estate properties while living in an apartment with white walls I never painted. My professional reputation is not my primary concern right now." He looked at her for another moment. "All right," he said. He sat back down. "Let me review whatever contract they put in front of you before you sign it. And Amara," he picked up his glasses, "be careful, not just legally. In general, men like Devereaux don't choose people without reasons, and the reasons aren't always what they tell you." "I know," she said. She gathered the folder and left. She told no one else. She went back to her office. She did her work. She cleared her desk for the transition in a way that was thorough and professional and gave nothing away to colleagues who would eventually ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. She took the calls from Richard Hargrove about her EVP onboarding schedule and participated in them with the appropriate level of engagement while knowing, in the part of her mind she'd learned to partition since childhood, that this chapter was already closing. On Friday, Jerome showed up at her office. Not called, not texted. Showed up in person, which was a thing he had not done in the 4 years she'd been at this company, and which told her immediately that the Savannah account had either not moved as planned or had revealed something that alarmed him. Her assistant buzzed her. "Your brother is in the lobby. He says it's urgent." Of course it was. "Send him up," she said. Jerome came through her office door with the energy of a man who had rehearsed this but was already deviating from the script. He was tall like their father, well-dressed in the way of someone who spent money on clothes as a confidence mechanism, and he had their mother's face. The broad forehead, the easy smile. But he was not smiling now. He was doing the thing he did when he was worried, which was to make himself take up space, standing in the center of the room rather than sitting, his hands moving slightly at his sides. "You didn't call me back about the 80,000, he said. "No," she said. "I didn't. Sit down, Jerome." "I'm fine standing." "I know. Sit down anyway." Something in her voice made him sit. She had never used that voice with him before. The flat, directive voice she used in boardrooms with people who were wasting her time. And she watched him register the difference and recalibrate. "What's going on with you?" he said. "Mama says you've been distant. Desiree thinks you're stressed about the new position." "Jerome," she folded her hands on the desk. "Tell me about the Savannah properties." His jaw moved, just slightly, a micro-adjustment that she had been trained by 9 years of financial work to recognize as the physical expression of someone buying half a second to choose their next word. "I already told you," he said. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You said that," she agreed. "You said that on the phone. And then 40 minutes after we hung up, you emailed Dad and told him to move the Savannah account before Sunday." Complete stillness. Jerome had a lot of qualities, some of which she had genuinely loved. His humor, his energy, the way he could light up a room without effort. But she had never, until this moment, seen him completely motionless. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then he leaned back slightly in the chair and his expression went through 3 or 4 changes very quickly before it landed on something that was almost angry. "Where did you get that?" he said. "That's not the question we're answering right now." "The hell it isn't. Who have you been talking to?" "Jerome." She kept her voice level. "I have documentation of 43 months of correspondence, spreadsheets, timelines, account transfers. I know about the holding company. I know about the Midtown condo. I know about the insurance gap payments and what actually happened to that money." She paused. "I know about the London posting." He went very still again. The London posting was the thing that mattered to him. She could see that immediately. Not because it was the largest item, it wasn't, not financially, but because it was the cruelest one. She had given up a career-defining opportunity, an international posting that her company had offered only twice in a decade, because her mother had called her crying and said her father's heart condition was worsening, and she didn't know what they'd do without Amara nearby. Amara had called the doctors. She had spoken to her father's cardiologist. She had arranged additional monitoring. She had turned down London and stayed. And Jerome had known that the heart condition was being managed and had said nothing. Had watched her make that call. Had been on the email chain where her mother wrote, the day after Amara declined the posting, "She's staying. Told you it would work." "Amara," he started. "Don't," she said. "Do not apologize to me right now. I am not ready to sit across a desk from you and listen to an apology." His mouth closed. "I want you to tell me one true thing," she said. "Right now. One true thing that you have never told me. Not about the money, not about the properties. One true thing about what you actually think of me." The question clearly wasn't what he'd prepared for. He looked at the desk between them, looked at his hands, and she watched something complicated happen in his face. Not guilt exactly, or not only guilt, but something messier and more specific. The expression of a person who has told a particular lie for so long that the truth has become a foreign language they no longer trust themselves to speak. "I think," he said slowly, "that you made it easy." "Tell me what that means." "It means—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "You always said yes, every single time. And at first it was— that's what families do, right? You help each other, and you were doing well, and we weren't. And it felt like that was just—" He stopped again. "But then it became a system. And once it's a system, you're not thinking about it the same way anymore. You're just maintaining the system." She looked at him. "You stopped being my sister," he said, and his voice had something real in it now, under the layers, something she hadn't heard from him in a long time. "And started being the solution. And I let that happen. We all let that happen." "You built a spreadsheet," she said. He closed his eyes. "You tracked my bonus cycles," she said. "You noted my response patterns. You wrote, 'Don't push her in Q1, she gets suspicious.' You engineered my mother's phone calls. You scheduled my father's health scares." Her voice was still level. She needed it to stay level. "You managed me like a revenue stream." "Amara, were you ever actually in trouble?" she said. "Any of it, The hospital bills, the business emergencies. Was any of it real? A long silence. Some of it, he said. Which parts? He didn't answer. She nodded slowly. Get out of my office, Jerome. I'm not angry right now, she said, which was both true and the most frightening thing she'd said to him. She could see that in his face. I will be. But right now I need you to leave before I am, because I have work to do, and I cannot afford to spend the rest of this day on this. He stood. He moved toward the door. He stopped. Who told you? He said. Who's been… Amara, whoever gave you that information, you need to understand they had to get it somehow. You need to think about what that means. She looked at him. Goodbye, Jerome. He left. She sat very still for approximately 90 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called Lucien. My brother just left my office, she said. I know, he said. Callum saw him go in. A pause. Are you all right? I told you I would be. That's not what I asked. She was quiet for a moment. He admitted it, not everything, but enough. What are you going to do? I'm going to finish my day, she said, and then I need to ask you something that I should have asked before I agreed to anything. Ask now. She took a breath. The documentation you gave me, the email chains, the spreadsheets. A pause. How long have you had it? Silence on the other end. Devereaux. 3 weeks, he said. She absorbed that. 3 weeks, which meant he'd had it before he walked into her lobby, which meant the investigation Callum had run in 24 hours had not produced this material. This material had been assembled over time, which meant, you knew about my family before that night, she said. The night on the porch. You didn't start investigating me because of what you saw. You already knew. A pause. Careful. Deliberate. Yes, he said. The room felt different. The quality of the air in it changed. Why? She said. Why were you investigating my family before you ever laid eyes on me? And this was the moment. She understood it the way you understand structural failures from the inside of them in real time. This was the moment the shape of things shifted entirely, because what Lucien Devereaux said next was something she had not seen coming, had not built into any version of the calculation, and it hit her with the particular force of a truth that explained everything and made everything worse simultaneously. Because your brother Jerome, he said, has been running a secondary scheme, not against you, against my organization. He incorporated a ghost entity 18 months ago using financial documentation that traces back, on paper, to Meridian Capital. He has been using the credibility of my holding company's name, without my knowledge and without authorization, to raise capital from investors who believe they are buying into a Devereaux-affiliated venture. A pause. He has raised $6.2 million from 11 investors. The money is not in the venture. The venture does not exist, and 2 of those investors have legal representation that has begun making inquiries. She could not speak. Amara, he said. Don't, she said. The inquiries have not yet reached a point where my organization's name appears in a legal document, he said. But they will. Within approximately 60 days, based on what my attorneys are telling me, they will. And when they do, Jerome Ellison's fraud will be attached, on paper, to my company, which means it becomes my problem, which means I was investigating your family before I ever saw you, because your brother used my name to commit a crime, and I needed to understand the full scope of what he'd built before I decided how to respond to it. She sat in her chair and breathed. So, she said, and her voice was very quiet, when you walked into my lobby, when you offered me a position and said no one would ever treat me like property again. She stopped. Was that about me? Or was that about Jerome? A silence that was the longest he had ever given her. Both, he said. In the beginning. And now? Another silence. Different in quality. She couldn't read it, and that frightened her more than anything he'd said. I need to come in, she said. Tonight. I need to sit across from you, and I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning, in order, and I need you to not manage what you tell me or sequence it for effect. Everything. 7 o'clock, he said. I'll be there, she said, and hung up. She sat in her office on the 14th floor of a building she was leaving, with the city spread out below her in the gray afternoon light, and she thought about a man who had watched her cry in a driveway and come to her office with a white card and said, "No one will treat you like property again," and understood now that the first time she had appeared in Lucien Devereaux's awareness, she had not appeared as a person he wanted to protect, but as a variable in a problem her brother had created. She thought about Marcus Webb's voice that morning. Men like Devereaux don't choose people without reasons. She thought about Jerome's face when she said she had the email chains. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone. Nobody is ever going to love you the way your family loves you. She put on her jacket. She picked up her bag. She took the folder from her desk drawer and put it in her bag and looked around her office one more time. The view, the good chair, the small photograph on her bookshelf of herself at her MBA graduation, 24 years old, squinting into the sun, believing the next part was going to be different from the last part. She turned off the light. She had 2 hours before she needed to be at Meridian, 2 hours to decide whether the man waiting for her there was the only honest thing in her current landscape, or whether she had walked out of one engineered situation and directly into another, and whether it mattered at this point, because the alternative was standing alone in the rubble of everything she'd believed in rebuilding from nothing, and she was not sure. For the first time in 38 years of being certain of her own capabilities, she was not sure she had enough left to do it alone. She got in the elevator. The doors closed. And in the descending quiet of that small metal box, Amara Ellison made the only decision left available to a woman who had just discovered that the two people who had shaped the entire architecture of her life, her family, who had taken from her, and the man who had offered to end it, had both from the very beginning been using her brother's crime as their starting point and had arrived at her from completely different directions for completely different reasons, and that she was standing at the exact center of something much larger and much more dangerous than a family's betrayal, something that had been in motion for 18 months before she ever put shopping bags on a porch railing and heard her own name used as a punchline. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. She walked out into the lobby and through the glass doors and into the cold October air, and she did not stop walking, because stopping was no longer an option, because the ground behind her had already given way, and the only direction that remained was forward into whatever Lucien Devereaux was going to tell her at 7 o'clock, the whole truth, finally, in order, without management or sequencing, and whatever came after that would require a version of herself she had not yet had to be. She was already becoming her. She was 12 minutes early. She sat in the car outside Meridian and watched the building and did not go in. The limestone facade was lit from below, pale gold against the dark, and the street was quiet in the way that certain streets in Georgetown go quiet after 8. Not empty, just stripped down to the people who belonged there and the people who knew where they were going. She had spent the 2 hours between her office and this building doing 3 things. She had called Marcus Webb and told him what Lucien had disclosed about Jerome. She had listened to Marcus's silence on the phone, the specific quality of it, the sound of a careful man processing something that exceeded his prepared framework. And then she had listened to him say, very quietly, "Amara, if what he's describing is accurate, your brother has exposed you." She had asked what that meant. Marcus had said, if Jerome used financial documentation traceable to your EVP transition as part of his cover story, and these things tend to layer, there is a scenario in which your name appears in this, not as a perpetrator, but as a thread an aggressive attorney will pull. She had thanked him, she had hung up, then she had driven past her parents' house, not to stop, not to confront anyone, just to drive past it. She had needed to see it as a physical object, the colonial with the stone fountain and the warm windows, and to understand, in her body rather than just her mind, that what it had represented to her for 9 years was not what it was. She had funded approximately 60% of the down payment and ongoing property costs of a house that was never actually her home and had never actually been a home to her in any way that the word is supposed to mean. She had needed to see it as stone and wood and landscaping and mortgage documentation. She had needed to stop seeing it as belonging. She'd driven past without slowing. Then she'd come here and parked and sat with her hands on the wheel and her heart doing something irregular in her chest. Not from fear, she recognized fear. This was different. This was the physical sensation of standing at the end of something long and waited until her breathing steadied. 7 o'clock. She got out of the car. The receptionist was gone. A different man sat at the front desk, older, with the specific quality of someone whose job was to notice everything and communicate nothing, and he simply nodded and gestured toward the elevator. 3rd floor. She knew the way. Lucien was standing when she came in, not at his desk this time, at the long conference table with documents spread across it and 2 chairs pulled out and a carafe of coffee she had not been offered during any previous visit, which told her something about how long he expected this to take. She stopped just inside the door. "You said from the beginning," she said, "in order, without managing it." "Sit down," he said. "I'll sit when I'm ready." She looked at the table, at the documents. "Start." He looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled out one of the chairs, not the one nearest to her, but the one opposite it, putting the table between them, which she understood as its own kind of acknowledgement, and sat down. 18 months ago, he said, a man named Theodore Marsh approached 2 of my passive investors with an opportunity. Private equity. East Coast commercial real estate. He presented documentation showing Meridian Capital Group as a co-underwriter. The documentation was convincing. The investors gave him a total of $900,000. She sat down. Marsh was a front, Lucien said. He operates as a facilitator for people who have ideas they don't want attached to their names. When my team traced the actual structure of the scheme, the originating entity was a company called JE Capital Ventures, incorporated 14 months ago in Delaware. The principal is your brother. JE, she said. Jerome Ellison. He didn't work hard to hide it. A pause. He didn't think he needed to. How many investors total? 11? 6.2 million raised over 14 months. He slid a document across the table. The money was dispersed in 3 directions. 40% went into the Savannah properties. Your family's holding company paid cash for the 3rd property in that portfolio 9 months ago. 20% went into your sister's Midtown condo. The remaining 40% is in an account in your brother's name at a private bank in the Cayman Islands. She looked at the document without touching it. He took $6 million from people who thought they were investing with you, she said. With my organization, Lucien said. My name, not yours. Though, he paused. The pause was telling. The story he told investors included a reference to a senior financial executive who was joining Meridian's advisory board. The description he used, he stopped. Tell me, she said. A black woman in her late 30s. Former Fortune 500 executive, one of the best financial minds on the East Coast. He looked at her directly. The description predates my offer to you by approximately 8 months. The room was very quiet. He told investors I would be joining your organization, she said, before you had any idea I existed. Before I had any idea you existed, Lucien confirmed. I believe he intended to use your professional reputation as validation for the scheme. Your profile, your credibility, your record. He may have been planning to approach you directly, to offer you a position with his entity, using my name as cover, which would have given him a genuine executive as window dressing while he continued to move money. She thought about Jerome on the phone. The Series B is coming together. I just need a bridge. The investors are nervous. The investors were nervous because they were starting to ask questions. The bridge wasn't for his legal fees. The bridge was to buy time to move money before the structure collapsed. She had almost given it to him. She had been 2 days away from wiring her brother $80,000 to help him manage the unraveling of a fraud that used her name as bait. Why didn't you tell me this in the beginning? She said. Because I needed to know how much you knew, he said. When I walked into your office, I didn't know whether you were aware of Jerome's operation. I didn't know whether you'd been kept deliberately uninformed or whether you were an active participant who had decided not to be anymore. You were investigating me. Yes. The offer was a test. Partly, he said, and partly real. Both things were true at the same time. She absorbed this, the dual nature of it, the way it didn't make what he'd done wrong so much as complicated in a way she didn't yet have the framework to evaluate. She set that aside. There was something more urgent. The investors who are making inquiries, she said. What do they have? Documentation from Jerome's original pitch package, my company name on prospectus materials. And now, in the last 3 days, he slid another document across. A letter from an attorney in New York representing 3 of the 11 investors. They have retained a forensic accounting firm. They are looking at Meridian Capital Group as a named entity. She picked up the letter this time. Read it. Put it down. 60 days was generous, she said. You have maybe 30 before this is in a filing somewhere public. 25, he said. My attorneys say 25. She looked at the documents spread across the table. Her mind was already moving, not emotionally. That part had temporarily disengaged, the things she did under pressure, the cold analytical gear that had gotten her through every crisis her family had ever manufactured. She could see the shape of it, the whole board, the way he'd described in their first meeting. She could see 4 moves ahead, and none of them were good, and one of them was less bad than the others. You need Jerome to recant, she said, or confess, or both. You need him on record stating that Meridian Capital had no knowledge of and no involvement in JE Capital Ventures, that the documentation was forged, and that your organization was used without authorization. If you have that before their forensic accountants complete their review, you can position Meridian as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. That's correct, he said. Jerome will not do that voluntarily, she said, because the moment he does, he has admitted to federal wire fraud in front of witnesses, and his only remaining play is to cooperate with a prosecutor who will want to know the full scope of the scheme, which will expose every asset, every property, every account. He will lose everything, and he will likely go to prison. Also correct. So you need leverage, she said. I have leverage, he said. I have had leverage for 3 months. What I have not had is a delivery mechanism. He paused. Jerome Ellison will not meet with me. He would not accept that meeting because he knows what I know, but he will meet with you. She sat back. There it was, the real shape of the offer, the real reason for the lobby, the white card, the no one will treat you like property again. Not false. She didn't think it was false, but not the whole structure. She was the delivery mechanism. She was the only person in this entire situation who could get close enough to Jerome Ellison to hand him what Lucien needed handed to him, the full documentation, the real consequences, the stark binary of cooperate or collapse. She was the one with access. She had always been the one with access. Her family had known that for 9 years. Now Lucien knew it too. She looked at him across the table. Say it plainly. I need you to meet with Jerome, he said. Show him what we have. Give him the choice. Cooperation, and we help structure the legal exposure in a way that protects the properties your parents genuinely own. The house in Brookhaven, which you helped pay for, but which your parents live in, and which I have no interest in taking from elderly people. Everything else is negotiable. If he refuses, he paused. Then my attorneys proceed, his name goes into the filing, the SEC gets involved because several of those investors crossed state lines, and the outcome is beyond anyone's ability to manage. And if I do this, she said, and Jerome cooperates, what happens to my family? They lose the Savannah properties, the Midtown condo, the Cayman account. They face civil liability to the 11 investors, which my organization will fund the settlement of in exchange for Jerome's cooperation and a signed legal statement exonerating Meridian. He looked at her steadily. They keep the Brookhaven house. They keep whatever legitimate savings they have. They keep their freedom. That's not nothing, she said. No, he said. It isn't. She looked at the table. She looked at the documents. She thought about her mother's voice and her father's silence and Jerome's face in her office that afternoon. The moment something real had crossed his expression, under the calculation. The something real that she had loved when they were children before the system was built. I need something from you, she said, before I agree to anything. What? I need to know what this is between us, she said, not professionally. I need to know whether what you told me about why you came to my office, about dignity, about what you saw on that street. I need to know whether any of that was real or whether it was part of the architecture of getting me into a room and making me useful. She watched his face. He was quiet for a long time. Both things can be true at the same time, he said finally. I know that. I asked you which one was the foundation. Another silence. The longest he had given her. And then something happened in his face that she had not seen there before. Not the boardroom stillness, not the careful management of reaction, but something that came from further back, something unguarded and slightly unprepared, as if the question had reached a part of him that didn't have a prepared answer. You walked away, he said, from people who should have been your home, with your dignity intact, in the dark. A pause. I have watched people lose everything and beg. I have watched people destroy themselves and others over money that meant nothing. I have never watched someone absorb that kind of damage and walk away like you walked away. He looked at the table between them. I built something around that. I let it influence my decisions in ways I don't entirely have language for yet. That is true. It is also true that I needed what your access could provide me. Both things are the foundation. I can't give you only one of them. She held his gaze. Okay, she said. She stood up. She looked at the documents. She picked up the folder shaped, the one with Jerome's originating documentation, the investor letters, the forensic trail. I'll meet with Jerome tomorrow, she said. On my terms. My location. Just the two of us. I'll have Callum. No, she said. No security. No monitoring. If you put someone in that room or within a block of it, he'll know, and he'll walk, and this ends badly for everyone. She looked at him. I need you to trust me in the room. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. She walked toward the door. She was almost through it when he spoke. Amara. She stopped, did not turn. Be careful with him, he said. Not for his sake, for yours. Whatever he says in that room, whatever he tells you about why, you don't owe him a reaction that costs you anything else. She stood in the doorway. I know, she said. She left. She called Jerome at 8:15. He picked up on the first ring again. She was beginning to understand that he would always pick up on the first ring when he was frightened. We need to meet, she said. Tomorrow. 11 o'clock. The diner on Route 7, the one with the blue awning near the highway interchange. Amara. You don't get to ask questions about this, Jerome. You show up or you don't. But if you don't show up, the next phone call you get won't be from me. A silence. I'll be there, he said. She hung up. She barely slept. When she did, she dreamed of the driveway, the shopping bags on the railing, the warm windows, her family's laughter reaching her through a door she hadn't opened. Except in the dream, she did open the door. And what was inside wasn't a dining room, but an office, documents spread across a table, and everyone she'd ever trusted seated around it. And they all looked up when she came in with the expressions of people who had been expecting her and had arranged everything accordingly. She woke at 5. She showered. She dressed carefully. Not armor, not performance, just the clothes of a woman who knew who she was, dark blazer, good shoes, the kind of put together that said, I am not coming apart, because the alternative was coming apart. And that was not on the table. She drank coffee. She reviewed the documents one more time. She put them in a clean folder and put the folder in her bag. She drove to the diner at 10:40, sat in the booth at the back, ordered coffee she would drink this time, watched the door. Jerome arrived at 11:03. He came in wearing a jacket she recognized, their father's old leather jacket, the one Jerome had claimed after Victor stopped wearing it, worn soft at the elbows. And the sight of it did something in her chest that she breathed through carefully. He scanned the room, found her, came to the booth. He slid in across from her and did not say anything immediately, and she let the silence sit there between them without filling it. He looked tired. Not the performed exhaustion he sometimes deployed when he wanted sympathy. Real tired. The kind that lived around the eyes and in the set of the shoulders. The kind that came from not sleeping and from knowing that something was coming that couldn't be stopped. You found out about the investors, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. He looked at the table. How bad is it? Put your hands flat on the table, she said. He looked at her. What? Put your hands on the table. I need to see them while I talk to you. Something crossed his face. He put his hands on the table. She could see them shaking slightly, not dramatically, just the fine tremor of someone whose nervous system had been running at high capacity for too long. She opened the folder. She placed the documents in front of him one at a time. The investor records, the wire transfers, the prospectus with Meridian Capital's name on it, the forensic accounting notice, the attorney's letter. She placed each one flat and waited while he looked at it before she placed the next. He read every page. His color changed as he read, not dramatically, a gradual draining, like something structural going slack under the surface. When he finished, she stacked the documents, put them back in the folder, and placed the folder in front of him. The man whose name is on this organization, she said, has evidence sufficient to bury you, federally. Wire fraud across 11 investors, 3 state lines, forged documentation, misappropriation of a registered company's identity. She kept her voice level, not cold, not warm, just clear. You are looking at a minimum of 8 years if a federal prosecutor decides to make an example of you. You are looking at the forfeiture of every asset in that portfolio. And you are looking at Mama and Daddy's names appearing in a civil suit filed by 11 people who gave you their money in good faith. Jerome's jaw was working. He was staring at the folder. He can make this quieter, she said. Not gone. It doesn't go away. But there is a version of this where the Savannah properties and the Midtown condo and the Cayman account are surrendered as part of a negotiated resolution. The investors are made whole, and you sign a legal statement exonerating Meridian Capital. In that version, Mama and Daddy keep Brookhaven. You face civil liability, but not federal prosecution. You get to be a person who made catastrophic decisions instead of a person who goes to prison. He was breathing through his mouth now. The tremor in his hands had worsened. He'll own us, Jerome said. His voice was stripped down to almost nothing. Whatever we give up, he owns it, and we'll owe him forever. You already owe him, she said. You put his name on your scheme. You are past the point of owing or not owing. The only question now is what the debt costs. How do I know he doesn't just take everything anyway? How do I know? Jerome. She leaned forward. Look at me. He looked at her. His eyes were wet. She hadn't seen Jerome cry since they were children, since their grandmother's funeral when he was 15 and she was 13, and they had sat in the back pew and held hands. She kept her voice even. I am the one at this table, she said. Not him, me. And I am telling you that the offer is real because I have staked my name on it. Whatever I am to you and whatever I've been to you, you know I don't lie. You have never in your life been able to say I lied to you. A long silence. A tear broke loose from his left eye. He pressed the back of his hand against it roughly, like he was angry at it. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him. I know, she said. I know you are. Amara. Don't, she said, and her voice was very quiet now, very measured, because she could feel the thing underneath it, the 38 years of it, pressing upward. Not today. Right now, we are fixing a problem because the alternative is worse. After it's fixed, after the papers are signed and the accounts are settled, and everyone is on the other side of this. After that, you can call me and we can have a different conversation. But not today. He pressed his hand against his eyes again. He reached across the table. He picked up the folder. What do I need to do? He said. She reached into her bag and produced a second document. Marcus Webb's letterhead. A legal cooperation agreement drafted last night on her instruction, outlining the terms precisely as she'd laid them out. She placed it in front of him. Sign page 4, she said. And then call your attorney and tell him you're cooperating. He looked at page 4. He looked at the pen she placed on the table. He picked it up. His hand was still shaking. He signed. She took the document back, put it in her bag, stood up. He looked up at her from the booth, her brother in their father's old jacket, in a diner on the edge of a highway, and she looked back at him and felt something she didn't have a single clean word for, something that was grief and anger, and the specific exhaustion of loving people who had taken from you, and the even more specific exhaustion of being the one who had to hold it all together anyway. "Jerome," she said, "when Mama and Daddy find out, and they're going to find out today, you need to be the one to tell them." "I know," he said. "Tell them the house is safe," she said. "Tell them that first." He closed his eyes. She left. She walked out of the diner into the cold air and stood on the concrete sidewalk with the highway noise filling the space around her and the signed document in her bag, and her heart doing something complicated and rhythmic in her chest. And she called Lucien. "It's done," she said. He signed. A pause. "Amara." "Don't thank me," she said. "Not yet." She looked at the diner window. She could see Jerome still sitting in the booth, both hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. "There's something you need to know. About the gala." "What gala?" "The Hartwell Foundation Gala," she said. "Next Friday. My family received an invitation through a board member, one of my mother's social contacts. They're planning to attend." She paused. "And I found out this morning that they've been telling people there, donors, board members, that I've had a breakdown, that my recent behavior is erratic and stress-related, and that my new professional association is—" She stopped. "Questionable." Silence. "They're trying to preemptively discredit you," he said, "before the cooperation agreement surfaces, before anything becomes public. They're trying to establish a narrative where I'm the unstable one, and anything I've done recently is a symptom." Another silence, different in quality from anything she'd heard from him before. "Are you going to that gala?" he said. She looked at the highway, at the cold October sky above it. "Yes," she said. "Then so am I," he said. She closed her eyes. She thought about what came next, what the gala meant, what walking into that room meant, what her family's faces would look like when they understood, finally and completely and publicly, that the system they had built and operated and optimized for 9 years had just come to its end. She thought about the version of herself who had stood on a porch with shopping bags believing she was going home. That version was gone now. What had replaced her was something quieter and harder and more honest, something that had been underneath all along, waiting for the story she'd been told to finally stop being loud enough to drown it out. "Devereaux," she said. "Yes." "Whatever happens at that gala," she said, "I need you to let me handle my family myself. Whatever I say to them, whatever they say to me. You don't step in unless I ask." A long pause. "Agreed," he said. "And then after," she said, "after it's done, we have a conversation. A real one. About what this is, not professional. The other thing." The silence was the softest one he had ever given her. "After," he said. She hung up. She stood in the October cold for one more moment, breathing the sharp air, feeling her own heartbeat steady and real and entirely her own, and she understood with perfect clarity that the gala was not an ending but a reckoning, that every person who had ever looked at her and seen a resource rather than a human being was about to be in the same room. And she was about to walk into it not as the woman they'd built their calculations around, but as something they had never once prepared for. And the distance between those two things was about to become the most expensive miscalculation her family had ever made. She got in her car. She put her hands on the wheel. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize, and when she opened it, 3 words that made everything she'd just done feel suddenly, terrifyingly insufficient, because the text said only, "He told them." And then a second text from the same number, 4 seconds later. They called the investors. She stared at the screen. Her family, her mother, her father, Desiree, had found out about Jerome's cooperation before he could control the disclosure. And instead of accepting the terms, instead of taking the house and their freedom and the version of this where they walked away intact, they had made a phone call to the 11 investors Jerome had defrauded and told them that Meridian Capital Group was a criminal organization and that Lucien Devereaux was the man behind the scheme and that Jerome Ellison was a whistleblower who had come forward at personal risk to expose it. They had flipped the script entirely, and they had done it in the 47 minutes between Jerome leaving that diner and this moment, which meant it wasn't panic. It was a plan. It had always been a plan. She called Lucien. He picked up before it rang. "I know," he said, and his voice was something she had not heard from him before. Not angry, not cold, but compressed. The voice of a man whose patience had found its limit and who had now made a decision that was going to be final. "How bad?" she said. "Bad enough," he said. "My attorneys are already on it. But Amara," a pause. "The gala isn't next Friday anymore." "What do you mean?" "I mean we go tonight," he said. "The Ellisons are at a preview reception at the Hartwell building right now. A donor cocktail hour that started 45 minutes ago." His voice was absolutely even. "I need you to decide in the next 30 seconds whether you're in this or whether you're not, because the window closes in an hour, and if we don't walk into that room tonight, the narrative your family just planted becomes the first thing every person in that building associates with your name." Her hands were tight on the wheel. Her heart was very loud. She thought about 38 years. She thought about a stone fountain and warm windows and 4 shopping bags on a porch railing. She thought about Jerome's shaking hands and the signed document in her bag and her family, right now, in a room full of donors and board members and the kind of people whose opinions built and destroyed reputations, telling the story they had chosen to tell. "Give me the address," she said. She drove with both hands on the wheel and the heat off, even though it was cold, because she needed the clarity that came with being slightly uncomfortable, the same way she'd learned to take important calls standing up. The body's discomfort keeping the mind from going soft at the wrong moment. Lucien had sent the address. The Hartwell building, 16 blocks from where she was sitting. She had 38 minutes before the reception ended, and the room dispersed and the story her family had planted became the only story in circulation. She drove. She did not call anyone. She did not rehearse what she would say. She had spent 38 years rehearsing, calibrating her words for rooms full of people who needed to be managed, softening her edges for family members who needed to feel comfortable, sharpening her arguments for boardrooms where she had to work twice as hard to be heard half as clearly. She was done rehearsing. Whatever came out of her mouth tonight would come out because it was true, and that was going to have to be enough. She found parking 2 blocks away. She sat in the car for 45 seconds. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. The dark blazer, the good shoes, the face of a woman who had been through something and was still standing, which was not the same as the face of a woman who had not been through anything, and she decided that was fine. That was actually what she wanted, that she was not interested tonight in looking unaffected. She got out of the car. The Hartwell building was a converted Federal-era townhouse on a corner lot, all brick and tall windows, warm light spilling out onto the sidewalk in a way that would have looked welcoming under different circumstances. 2 men in dark suits flanked the entrance. A woman with a clipboard checked names. Music drifted out. Something low and string-heavy, the soundtrack of money congratulating itself. She gave her name. The woman with the clipboard found it, because Amara Ellison was on the Hartwell Foundation's donor list and had been for 3 years, a fact her family had apparently used to secure their own invitations through the same board member connection, leveraging her name to get into a room where they then planned to destroy it. The irony of it was so complete it almost deserved acknowledgement. She went in. The room was the kind of beautiful that required significant money to appear effortless. Warm lighting, flowers that cost more per arrangement than most people's monthly car payments, perhaps 60 people distributed across 2 connected spaces. She recognized faces, a city councilwoman, 2 federal judges, the managing partner of the largest private equity firm in the Mid-Atlantic, a university president, the kind of gathering where reputations were both built and quietly, permanently dismantled. She found her family in under 90 seconds. Her mother saw her first. Margaret Ellison was standing near the bar with Desiree and 2 women Amara didn't recognize, holding a champagne glass with the particular ease of a woman who had decided to perform comfort so well that it became real. She was wearing the cream silk blouse that Amara had bought her 2 Christmases ago. When she saw Amara, something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt, not yet. Something more operational, a rapid recalculation. And then she arranged her face into the warm, slightly concerned expression she used when she wanted to control a room's perception of the relationship before Amara could establish her own. "Baby," she said, opening her arms slightly, projecting warmth at a volume calibrated for the surrounding guests. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." Amara did not walk into the embrace. She stopped 4 feet away, close enough for private conversation, far enough that the performance of maternal warmth had no landing place, and she said quietly and clearly, "Mama, where's Daddy?" Margaret's arms came down. Her expression shifted, still controlled, but the edges tightening. "He's speaking with Harold Whitmore by the window. Amara, you look exhausted. Are you all right? We've all been worried." "Don't," Amara said. One word, not loud, not angry, just final. Desiree stepped forward slightly. She was wearing the cashmere wrap, Amara's Christmas gift from 2 years ago, different Christmas. And she had the look of someone who had been briefed and was ready. "Amara, I know things have been tense lately, but tonight isn't the place." "You called the investors," Amara said. Silence. Just their little pocket of it, because the room continued around them, strings and conversation, and the polite percussion of a donor reception. Desiree's chin came up. "We don't know what you're talking about." "You called them within 47 minutes of Jerome leaving that diner," Amara said, "which means Jerome called you from the parking lot before he drove away, which means you had the contingency already prepared, which means this—" She gestured almost imperceptibly at the room. "This room, tonight, the story you've been telling people, this is not a response to what's happening. This was always the next move." Margaret set her champagne glass on a passing tray with the steadiness of a woman who had been managing situations her entire life. "I don't know who has been filling your head with—" "Stop." Amara's voice was still quiet, still even. And somehow that was worse. Amara could see it landing that way on both of them, the absence of hysteria making it impossible to reframe as breakdown or stress. "I'm going to speak to Daddy. And then I'm going to find whoever in this room you've spoken to tonight, and I'm going to have a different conversation with them. You can stand here and watch, or you can go home. But this is the last time tonight you speak to me as though I don't know what I know." She walked past them toward the windows. Her father was easy to find. Victor Ellison was a tall man, still lean in his 70s, with the specific dignity of a black man of his generation who had learned early that dignity was armor and had worn it so long it had become indistinguishable from his actual posture. He was speaking with an older white man in a blue suit, Harold Whitmore, the foundation board member. And he was doing it with the warmth and assurance of a man entirely at ease, which was its own kind of performance, Amara understood now, the same performance in a different register. He saw her coming. Something happened in his face that she had never seen there in 38 years. Not guilt. She had not expected guilt from Victor Ellison, and she did not see it. Not fear exactly. Something more like the expression of a chess player who has seen an opponent make a move that wasn't in the anticipated range and is rapidly revising the board. "Amara," he said, warm, easy. "I didn't know you'd be here." Harold Whitmore turned. He was the kind of man who carried institutional authority like weight, comfortable with it, not performing it. He smiled at her with what appeared to be genuine recognition. "Ms. Ellison, your father was just telling me about your recent transition. He mentioned some concerns about your—" "Mr. Whitmore," she said, and her voice was measured and direct and entirely professional. "I appreciate you being here tonight, and I have significant respect for the Foundation's work. I want to be straightforward with you because I believe you deserve that. Whatever you've been told about me this evening by members of my family, I'd encourage you to hold lightly until you've had a chance to review my professional record independently. I have documentation available through my attorney that speaks to my conduct and judgment more reliably than second-hand characterizations." A pause. "I also want you to know that I intend to increase my contribution to the Hartwell Foundation this year by 40%. Because the scholarship work you're doing for first-generation students is the most important work in this room." Whitmore looked at her for a moment, then at Victor, then back at her. "I'll look forward to that conversation," he said carefully, and excused himself with the practiced grace of a man who had learned to exit gracefully from other people's complicated situations. Victor Ellison waited until Whitmore was out of earshot. Then he said, quietly, "That was unnecessary." "No," Amara said. "It was necessary. It just wasn't comfortable." He looked at her. In 38 years, she had never looked at her father quite this directly. Not because she'd been afraid of him, but because she had always been, on some level, trying to deserve something from him. to earn the version of his regard that felt unconditional, and that reaching toward had always slightly bent her gaze. She was not reaching toward anything right now. "Jerome told you," he said. "Jerome signed a cooperation agreement," she said. "And then someone in this family made a phone call that violated the terms of that agreement within the hour, which means Jerome is now in a significantly worse position than he was this morning." Victor's jaw tightened. "Jerome is not your responsibility." "You're right," she said. "He's not." A pause. "Daddy, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to understand that I already know the answer. So this isn't a trap, and it isn't a test. I just need to hear it from you." She held his gaze. "Did you know? From the beginning, the spreadsheets, the timing, the coordinated requests. Was that yours?" A long silence. Victor Ellison had been many things in his life, some of them honorable, some of them not. The full, complicated range of a man who had grown up with very little and had spent his adult life trying to ensure his children had more, and somewhere along the way the methods had curdled and the ends had stopped justifying themselves. But the habit had continued. He looked at his daughter. He said, "You always had more than you needed." She took a breath. The answer was not yes, and it was not no, and it was somehow, precisely, the most honest thing he had ever said to her about it. Not an admission exactly, but a window, a brief, unguarded window into the logic that had governed 9 years of coordinated decisions. You always had more than you needed, as if abundance was a justification, as if the presence of surplus made the taking acceptable, as if what was hers was communal property that she simply happened to be administering. She looked at her father for a long moment. "I know," she said. "I did, and I would have given it to you, freely, if you had asked me as your daughter instead of managing me as a resource." Her voice was very quiet. "That's the part I don't think any of you ever understood. I would have said yes, to most of it, because I loved you and I wanted you to be all right. You didn't have to build a system. You just had to tell me the truth." Victor said nothing. She had not expected him to. Victor Ellison was a man who spoke when he had decided what to say, and he had not decided. She left him at the window. She was crossing the center of the room when the doors opened. She felt the change before she saw it, the slight shift in the room's social weather that occurs when someone enters who carries a particular kind of weight. Conversations paused, not stopping completely but dipping, the way sound dips when something absorbs it. Heads turned with the involuntary quality of reflex rather than decision. Lucien Devereaux walked in with 2 men behind him, Callum and one other, both positioned with the practiced invisibility of people trained to be present without intruding. And he walked with the same quality he'd had in her lobby the first time. The absolute absence of the need to announce himself, the room announcing him instead. He found her immediately. He crossed to her with the directness of someone who had decided the geography of the room was irrelevant except as it pertained to her location within it. He stopped beside her. Not in front of her, not behind her. Beside. She understood the difference. He said very quietly, "How are you doing?" "I'm standing," she said. "I can see that." A pause. The room was watching them now. Not all of it, not obviously, but enough of it. The social sonar of 60 people in an enclosed space, registering an arrival and an alignment, and beginning to process what it meant. "My family is here," she said. "I know. They've been talking to people." "I know that too." He paused. "Whitmore has already spoken to 2 of the judges. My read is that the damage is contained and reversible, but it needs to be addressed directly." He looked at her. "There's a moment coming in about 4 minutes when the foundation director makes welcoming remarks. When he finishes and the room opens up, people will migrate. That is the window." "The window for what?" she said. "For whatever you decide to do," he said. "I am not going to tell you what to say, but I will stand beside you when you say it, if that is what you want." She looked at him. The question she'd asked in his office earlier, was this real or was it architecture, felt different now in this room, in this moment. Not resolved, not simple, but different in the way that questions feel different once you've accepted that the answer is probably both, and the both is the thing you have to learn to live inside. "Stay close," she said. He nodded once. The foundation director, a slight, efficient man named Garrett, who took his work seriously in a way that made him good at it, tapped a glass and the room gathered itself. He spoke for 3 minutes about the scholarship program, the first-generation students, the reach of the foundation's work. Amara heard it and didn't hear it. She was watching the room, her mother near the bar, now alone, watching Lucien with an expression Amara couldn't read from this distance, but could feel the texture of. Her father still at the window. Jerome was not here. Jerome was somewhere else tonight, dealing with the specific weight of what he'd signed and what his family had done with it afterward. Desiree had moved closer to their mother, the two of them forming the compact unit they always defaulted to when they felt cornered. Garrett finished. The room opened. The migration began. She moved first. She walked toward the center of the room, not toward her family, not toward any one person, just to the center, where the sight lines opened in every direction, and Lucien moved with her, a half step behind and to her left, and she felt the room's attention realign the way it does when something is about to happen that people sense before they can articulate. Judge Eleanor Ferris came to her first, a federal judge in her early 60s, a woman Amara had met twice at prior foundation events, and who had the reputation of someone who formed opinions carefully and held them firmly. She extended her hand. "Miss Ellison," she said, "I understand congratulations are in order for your new position." "Thank you, Judge Ferris." She shook the hand. "I hope to have the opportunity to discuss some of the financial architecture work we're doing. It's quite different from my previous role, but the core principles are the same." "I'd welcome that conversation." The judge glanced at Lucien with the measured assessment of someone who recognized him and had opinions. "Mr. Devereaux, it's been some time." "Judge Ferris," he said. Nothing more. The restraint itself was a kind of statement. The judge looked back at Amara. "I heard something this evening that I found surprising," she said. She was not a woman who softened things unnecessarily. "Characterizations of your recent professional decisions as concerning. I found them surprising because your record is not the record of someone whose judgment is in question." "No," Amara said. "It isn't." She held the judge's gaze. "What you heard came from members of my family who are currently navigating the consequences of a 9-year financial scheme that used my income as its primary funding source. I have legal documentation supporting that characterization. I understand that's an extraordinary thing to say at a donor reception, and I apologize for the circumstances requiring it to be said here." Judge Ferris was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate directness," she said finally. "It's underused in rooms like this." She nodded once. "I look forward to that conversation about your work." And she moved on. Harold Whitmore materialized at her other side within 2 minutes. With him, a woman Amara recognized as the managing partner of a major private equity firm, Claire Sato, who had a reputation for both precision and decisiveness. They had not been formally introduced. Whitmore made the introduction. Claire Sato shook Amara's hand and held it a beat longer than standard. "I looked you up after Harold mentioned you earlier. The Callaway restructuring. That's your work." "It is," Amara said. "I've been looking for someone to lead a specific advisory engagement for the past 4 months," Claire said. "Perhaps we could schedule time." It was that simple, and that not simple simultaneously, because Amara understood that what was happening in this room right now was the visible, social surface expression of something that had been months in the making underneath. The deliberate, patient architecture of a man who had chosen her before she had chosen him, and who had brought her into a room full of exactly the kind of people her talent deserved access to, and who was standing beside her while she accessed it, not speaking, not intervening, not managing, just present. She gave Claire Sato her attorney's contact information. She spoke to 7 more people in 20 minutes. She was precise, warm without performing it, honest about the circumstances without being dramatic about them. She was, in the room, exactly who she had always been in boardrooms. The person who saw the whole board, who was 4 moves ahead, who did not need the room to like her, but who had the particular quality that made rooms trust her anyway. Her mother came to her at the 40-minute mark. Margaret Ellison crossed the room with the posture of a woman who had been watching and waiting and calculating and had decided that the calculation had shifted enough to require a different approach. She came alone, without Desiree. That was itself information. She had decided that whatever she was going to try, she needed to try it without witnesses from her own corner. She stopped in front of Amara. Lucien took a single step back, not leaving, just giving the space its correct dimension. This is not the place, Margaret said, and her voice was pitched low and very controlled. You chose this place, Amara said. You came here tonight. You spoke to people here tonight. The place is yours. Her mother's eyes went to Lucien and then back. You don't know what you're doing, she said. You don't know who this man is or what you're walking into. Mama, Amara said, I know exactly who he is, and I know exactly who you are, and I know that you have known me for 38 years and you decided that what I was useful, not beloved, not irreplaceable, useful. She kept her voice even. There were people within earshot, and she was not interested in a scene. That's the thing I've been sitting with, not the money I can make. The thing I've been sitting with is that I spent 38 years trying to be enough for people who had already decided I was sufficient. Margaret's face was doing something complicated. Amara had seen that face in 1,000 configurations. The warmth face, the worried face, the proud face, the hurt face. This configuration was one she hadn't seen before, and it took her a moment to identify it because she'd never expected to see it from her mother. It was the face of someone who had been seen completely, with nothing left to position. I love you, her mother said. And for once, for the first time in recent memory, there was no engineering in it. It was just the 3 words stripped of context and calibration. Amara stood with those words for a moment. I know, she said. I believe that. And I believe it doesn't fix anything. Both of those things are true at the same time. Margaret's eyes filled. She did not let them spill. Victor Ellison's wife, in 38 years of difficult things, had never let herself cry in public, and she was not going to start tonight. What happens now? Her mother said. Jerome cooperates with the legal process. The properties go. The accounts get settled. You and Daddy keep Brookhaven because that is the house where I grew up and I am not interested in taking it. Amara paused. And then nothing for a while. We don't call each other. We don't have Sunday dinners. We don't send emergency texts. We stop performing the shape of something we have to rebuild from the inside if it's going to mean anything. Another pause. Maybe one day it means something again. I don't know. I'm not making you any promises about that. Her mother looked at her. That's fair, she said. Not graciously, not warmly, just accurately, the way Victor said things. She turned and walked back toward the window where her husband was standing. Amara watched her go. Lucien was beside her again. She hadn't heard him move. Are you ready to leave? He said quietly. She looked around the room one more time. The judges, the executives, the board members, people who had heard something about her tonight and were now in the process of revising it, not because she'd performed anything, but because she'd simply been what she was in front of them and let them recalibrate accordingly. It was, she realized, what she had always been capable of. It had just always been spent in rooms that were too small for it. Yes, she said. They walked out together. On the sidewalk, the cold air hit her like something she needed. She stood in it and breathed. Behind her, inside, the reception continued. The strings and the polite conversation, and her parents at the window, and her sister at the bar, and 60 people all carrying their own versions of tonight back to wherever they went when rooms like this released them. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Jerome is going to be all right, she said. Not a question. If he cooperates fully, yes, Lucien said. My attorneys will work with his. The civil liability is manageable. He won't rebuild what he had, but he'll be all right. She nodded. She looked at the building across the street, an ordinary building, a laundry, a phone repair shop, the ordinary infrastructure of ordinary life existing without drama or consequence, asking nothing of anyone. She turned to look at Lucien. He was already looking at her with the directness that had unsettled her from the first moment in her lobby, and that she had gradually come to understand was not aggression or dominance, but simply the quality of a man who did not look away from things he'd decided mattered. You said after, she said. I did. It's after. He held her gaze. What I told you in the office, he said, about what I saw on that street, that was true. All of it. A pause. The other part, Jerome, the organization, what I needed, That was also true. I'm not going to construct a version for you where one of those things cancels out the other. I don't think you'd believe it, and I don't think you'd respect it. No, she said. I wouldn't. So, he said, you know the whole shape of it. You know what it costs me to tell you that, and what it costs me that I need to keep telling you true things, even when the true thing is not the most advantageous thing. A pause. That is not something I have done before. With anyone. She looked at him in the cold air, this man who had appeared at the worst moment of her life and turned out to be simultaneously her exit and her complication, who had given her access to a version of herself she hadn't known was waiting, who had been honest with her even when honesty was not strategic, who still moved through the world in ways she did not entirely know and might never entirely know. I'm not easy, she said. I know. I'm not going to be managed. I know that too. And I need time, she said. Not from the work. From the rest of it. I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not funding someone else's life. I've never had that time, and I need it. He nodded. Then take it. I'll still run the portfolio. I know. But the other thing is slower, she said. Whatever the other thing is. He looked at her for a long moment. Slower, he agreed. She looked at him one more moment. Then she looked at the street, the cold night, the ordinary traffic, the city moving around them with its enormous indifference to the specific weight of this specific evening. She started walking toward her car. She had taken 3 steps when she stopped and turned back. Devereaux. Yes. Thank you, she said. Not for the job, for the first night, for ordering Callum to find out who I was instead of just driving away. She paused. I didn't have anyone else coming. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold with his hands in his pockets, and she could not read his face entirely from this distance, and maybe that was fine. Maybe you did not need to read everything. Maybe some things were allowed to be in process. Neither did I, he said. She turned and walked to her car. She did not feel the way she'd expected to feel. There was no lightness, no sudden clarity, no sense of burdens lifted. What she felt was closer to the sensation after a long surgery, the ache of something having been correctly done, the particular exhaustion of a body that has survived what it was supposed to survive, and underneath both of those things, something quiet and persistent that was not yet happiness, but was in the same family as it. She drove home. She drove past Brookhaven, not to see anything, but because the route was honest. The house was dark. Her parents were still at the reception. The stone fountain sat in the driveway unlit, and she looked at it without the old weight and without new contempt, just looked at it as stone and water and a symbol of something her mother had wanted that they had all found a way to pay for. She let herself look. She kept driving. Her apartment was dark when she got home. She turned on one lamp. She set her bag on the table, the folder still in it, the signed cooperation agreement, the documents that had restructured the last 9 years into something true-shaped. She went to the kitchen and made actual tea and actually drank it, standing at the counter in the good silence of a space that was hers. She looked at the white walls. She had never painted them because there was always something else first, always a reason the energy went somewhere else. She stood in her kitchen at 11:15 at night and thought, yellow, not bright yellow. The deep, warm yellow of late afternoon light in a room you love, the color of her grandmother's kitchen in Baltimore where she had eaten peach cobbler from a cracked ceramic bowl and believed life was mostly good. She thought she would paint them next weekend. She thought she would take the London posting that was no longer available and find a different one, or build toward a different one, or do the work she was about to do for Meridian Capital with such precision and force that other opportunities would come regardless, because they always had. She had always been capable of making them come. She thought about Jerome, about what it would cost him to rebuild something from honesty instead of from architecture, about whether he was capable of it. She didn't know. She had decided, somewhere between the diner and the sidewalk outside the Hartwell building, that his capability was his problem, not in cruelty, but in the recognition that she had been making his capability her responsibility for so long that she had confused the two, had believed that her effort could substitute for his character, and that belief had been the most expensive lie in a landscape full of expensive lies. She thought about her mother saying, I love you in the only unperformed way she'd ever heard it, stripped of engineering and audience, just 3 words laid down without support structure. She thought about how love could be real and still be insufficient, how it could exist alongside manipulation without canceling it, without being canceled by it, how people were capable of loving you and using you simultaneously, not because love was fraudulent, but because human beings were more complicated than their best qualities. She set the mug down. She went to her bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, not exhausted the way she'd been every night for 9 years, the hollow exhaustion of a person perpetually depleted, but tired in the clean and earned way of someone who had done what the day required. She thought about Lucien. She thought about the particular quality of standing next to someone rather than being positioned by them, the difference between an alliance and a transaction, and how the line between them was sometimes thin and sometimes non-existent, and sometimes the only thing that mattered. She thought about a man who had chosen honesty when it was not advantageous. She thought about how rare that was. She thought about slower. She lay down. She looked at the ceiling and let the day settle over her, the way days settle when you stop bracing against them. Jerome's shaking hands, her mother's unguarded eyes, her father's one honest sentence, the judge's handshake, Claire Sato's card in her bag, Lucien on the sidewalk saying neither did I. All of it layering down until it was simply the sediment of a day that had been necessary, that had cost what it cost, that had produced something that was not resolution so much as ground, actual ground. For the first time in 9 years, something she was standing on rather than constantly reinforcing. 3 months later, she painted the walls. The color was almost exactly right, warm without being loud, the yellow of a room where someone had decided to stay. She did it herself over a Saturday, with drop cloths and a roller and bad music playing from her phone, and when she was done, she sat on the floor in the middle of her living room with paint on her forearms and looked at what she'd made of the space and felt something settle permanently into place, the way a door settles into a frame that has finally been properly adjusted. She had been running Meridian's global portfolio for 11 weeks. The work was the most demanding she had ever done and the most fully herself she had ever been doing it. No padding, no softening, no managing upward in ways that asked her to be smaller. She had restructured 3 underperforming assets, identified a development opportunity in the Gulf Coast infrastructure corridor that her projections showed could yield significant returns in a 4-year window, and hired 2 analysts who were, in her honest assessment, brilliant and had not previously been in rooms that deserved them. She had started a small fund, not through Meridian, separately, personally, from her own money. A scholarship fund for young women coming out of environments where their financial capacity had been leveraged against them by the people closest to them. She had not announced it. She had simply set it up and found 3 recipients and watched the first one start a graduate program in public policy and felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly, more like continuity. Like she was part of a longer line than just her own story. Jerome had cooperated fully. The civil settlement had been reached. The Savannah properties had been liquidated. The Cayman account had been surrendered. He was living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Rockville and working for a small logistics company that a former colleague had helped him find, and he called her once a month on Sunday evenings. Not asking for anything, not performing contrition, just calling, talking about ordinary things, the job, a book he'd read, a memory from when they were children that he seemed to need to lay somewhere safe. She always answered. She didn't know what they were building. She was allowing it to be unnamed for now. Her parents had stayed in Brookhaven. Her father had taken a part-time consulting position. Her mother had joined a community garden, which was either a genuine reinvention or the most organized performance of reinvention Amara had ever witnessed, and she had decided that the distinction was less important than she'd once believed, that people could begin to become different things even if the beginning looked a great deal like a performance of beginning, and that she was not responsible for auditing the process. She called her mother on her birthday. Her mother called her on hers. It was not warm in the way it had been. It was not dishonest in the way it had been. It was 2 women navigating the aftermath of something that had cost them both, which was not the same as love, but was not nothing, and for now it was what it was. Desiree had not called. Amara allowed that too. She finished her tea. She sat in her yellow living room. On the coffee table was a file she was reviewing for a Monday morning meeting, and beside the file was a novel she'd been reading for pleasure. the first novel she had read for pleasure in 4 years. And beside the novel was her phone, which showed a text from Lucien that had arrived an hour ago while she was finishing The Walls. The Gulf Coast report came in. "You were right. Call me when you're done." She picked up the phone. She held it. It was still slower. They had dinners sometimes. Good dinners, long ones, with conversation that moved between the professional and the personal in a way that was not entirely comfortable and was entirely honest, which she had come to prefer over comfortable dishonesty, which was what most people meant when they said things were going well. He told her more things. Not everything. There were parts of his world that would always remain adjacent to her rather than shared, and she had made her peace with the adjacency, had decided that the portion of someone you actually receive is never the totality, that nobody hands you everything, and that the question was whether what you received was real, what she received from him was real. She looked at the text, she looked at her yellow walls, she looked at the novel and the file, and the life she had built inside a space she had finally, actually, decided to inhabit. She called him back. He picked up on the second ring. "I was right," she said, and he laughed. A real laugh, brief and unguarded, the laugh of a man who rarely laughed and meant it when he did. And she sat in the middle of her painted living room and felt the particular warmth of having been known accurately by someone who was paying attention. Outside, the November dark was complete and quiet. Inside, one lamp was on. She stayed on the phone.